Hi everyone! We're doing an episode on Chanel, but we're not doing it on Chanel as we know her today. We want to go back to pretty much the beginning part of her career. She is someone that I think most people, if they know anything about her history, we all have mixed emotions. I think she's radical in her thinking and in her way of bringing simplicity to women's styles. I love the fact that she's fierce, or she was fierce, and an amazing businesswoman at a time when women in business were not really regarded as champions. So she could be a role model and inspiration on that level. She began her life in a very difficult place. And I find that to be a really important fact, because a lot of people think that if you're born into money or born into affluence with the right connections and money behind you, you can really make it. But Chanel was born to a philandering father, and her mother died when she was quite young. I believe she was 12. And her dad placed her in an orphanage in the town of Brive in France, in the middle of France. So for 6 years she spent her young teenage to womanhood in this orphanage, and after she left took really difficult manual jobs. But in 1914, I believe, I want to look at my notes, 1913, 1914, she actually began her business, and it started by accident. So throughout her various jobs in her late teens, early 20s, she actually met a gentleman by the name of Etienne Balsam and became his mistress and went to his estate, his compound. His place was considered one of the best training grounds for racehorses. And at that time, she was able to really refine her equestrian skills and was actually much admired for them. But in the course of moving to this compound, she was gifted incredible gowns and socialized with really the high society of that area. But she didn't want to be considered a kept woman. So her way of kind of rebelling against it was to wear very basic clothes, very simple things, and on many levels very non-gender related clothing. Prior to her going to Paris, she had met Arthur Capel, which his nickname was Boy Capel, and he was a friend of Etienne's, and he was a huge fan of Chanel's. He loved what she did, loved her, and he believed in her gift so much that he helped her set up her first shop. And the rest is history, as they say. One of the things I love about doing these videos is we do a lot of research beforehand, and I never knew that Chanel, I knew that she started off her career with hats, but I never knew that she took already made hats and repurposed them and sold them. So she was ahead of her time on so many levels. But in 1914, she opened up her first official store in Deauville, and it was a strategic location because the wealthy went there, and even though the wartime affected business, she still became kind of the favorite of so many of the upper strata in France. I want to stop talking and begin showing you some of the clothes that we've put out for you. My early Chanel pieces are really gems in my crown, so to speak. This delicious, it's a silk souffle, it looks like a silk gauze, is from the late 20s, early 30s. You can't really see the detailing. It has these radiating darts, probably 30 or 40, starting right at the bust, going all the way down, and then this swag with a lace applique. Later in her career, I mean later meaning mid-20s probably, she started using embroidery and lace as surface design. This incredible piece, has lace under the arm, and then it has this tuck detail in the back, with the lace basically being the way to cover it. And then this fabulous dramatic scarf, which I mean, classic beyond, and it is, I wouldn't classify this a little black dress because it's more than that. It is haute couture. It's in excellent condition, and it's a piece that I bought here in the store. The woman whose mother it belonged to came in maybe a year or two after I opened the store. So this is one of my earlier pieces. Along with this piece is this very curious, oh, actually before I show you the dress, I want to show you this box. It's brown from age, it's falling apart. It has the 31 Rue Cambon address and telephone number. It also lists the Cannes boutique and the Biarritz boutique. I went to Paris, and whenever I go, I try to go to the auction house. There's this one massive auction house in the 9th that every week there's like, I don't know, 40 auctions that happen. And the trick is to go when there isn't a vintage clothing auction, because the competition is pretty intense and it's international competition. If you happen to be there when there isn't a vintage clothing auction, oftentimes they sell entire castles or you know, just one category. And I happened to be there when in a showcase was that Browning box, and inside the box was this incredible 1930s satin gown. What's beautiful about this is it has a gathering, an extremely tight gathering in the bust area. So it can actually hold a rather ample bust. And it has the same detail in the back. The inside, you can see it's couture finished. It's a really beautiful kind of silhouette in the back. But the issue is the label is not in here. So I will call this a Chanel attribution. It's one of the things that I will need to research when I go to Paris, to just find it in the archives to verify that it is in fact a Chanel piece. So this one is another treasure. And then moving right along, fast forwarding to probably the late 50s, early 60s, could be later, is this very simple, beautiful, ecru colored lace couture Chanel gown. I see this as like being the penultimate wedding dress. And it's so simple, and I mean, it totally transcends time. And also, for the 1960s, we have a beautiful, it's a brocade that has like a Raoul Dufy rose woven into the silk. The spaghetti straps, asymmetrical zipper. This is also couture, and it has a matching coat, which is just stunning. Now, we wouldn't, speaking of coats, I should mention this piece. This is a mystery. It is a panne silk velvet with a gold lame, so it's a brocade of sorts, fur trim. It's a wrap design with a scarf that throws in the back. Why it's a mystery is it has a label that would make one think that it is Coco Chanel design from the 20s, and judging by the silhouette, it's probably 1925-26, but I don't think it's a real Chanel. So that's a piece that I'll need to research as well. Included is this hat. It is classic for Chanel. It's very boyish. It's a black velvet with many grosgrain ribbons for decoration. And then the leather banding has disintegrated, but the label is still intact. So there we go. And then we would not be doing Chanel if we didn't talk about her being impacted by her love of the British and her love of wool and tweeds, and how she infused that into her clothing, and particularly in her suits. Jersey as well was another fabric that she was a lover of, and I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that during wartime, jersey was one of the fabrics that she was able to acquire and utilize for her designs. This Chanel suit has a wool jersey for the blouse and for the trim, and the fabulous tweed, and it is a couture suit. You'll see the labels, and it has the iconic weighted chain on the bottom. If you look at the details on her pieces, it's not just about, you know, how the jersey is inset into the fabric, but you look at the buttons, for example. They're two-tone, which is not an easy task. You look at the lining, it's quilted. I mean, she did just beautiful, beautiful work on her clothes. And, you know, I say transcending time. These things are still very relevant today. We have one more earlier Chanel tweed suit. And this one has the classic Chanel logo buttons. The problem is the silk has disintegrated in the lining. So I don't usually buy pieces that have serious condition issues, but what's good about having a piece like this is, you know, it's wearable. You don't have to worry about altering it for size because it's as is currently. Couture really shouldn't be messed with as far as alterations go, because you're changing the intention of the artist. But this being a 1960s couture Chanel, and this being a 1990s or 2000 Lagerfeld ready-to-wear Chanel, you can see the continuity of using tweed and also using pattern on pattern. So, and the iconic Chanel Camellia. And then last but not least, where would we be without a little whimsy? So this Chanel hoodie is never worn, came from an estate here in LA where the woman had extremely wonderful taste, and many of her things were actually never worn. So good for me, good for my clients. I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I love about Chanel is she was fierce and an incredible businesswoman. She was one of the first designers to actually cash in on her name with creating a perfume. Chanel No. 5 was the 5th incarnation, and 5 was her favorite number. She created cosmetics, and her reach was more than just fashion. She also designed costumes for stage and for the film. So if you think about, how does someone who was raised in an orphanage crack into society the way she did? Well, in the teens, like around 1917, she was introduced to this very colorful personality, Misia Serre, S-E-R-T. If you're curious, there's a biography on Misia that I think should be turned into a script, because the cast of characters in Paris at that time is, it'll just fill your imagination and make you hungry for more. But Misia was very wealthy. She was a patron of the arts, and she fell in love with Coco Chanel because of her graciousness, her social abilities, and she basically took her under her wing. She introduced her to the high strata, upper society of France, and also to the amazing artists that were living in Paris at the time. So Misia was important to Chanel pretty much throughout her life, and through Monsieur's death in 1950. When Chanel's love of her life, Boy Capel, passed away tragically in a car accident, Monsieur took her on these extravagant world trips, and was a form of distraction, but it also contributed greatly to her design and to her meeting other people, which expanded her world and her success. In addition to perfume and makeup and clothing, Chanel also began designing and collaborating with some pretty amazing designers in creating costume jewelry. Her influence of historical things resulted in her creating the Maltese cross, and that is used today in Chanel jewelry. But one of the best collaborations and timely collaborations was with a woman who did poured glass. Her name was Madame Gripoix, Grippoix, and she would pour glass into the frame of pieces. So this necklace is a Madame Gripoix poured glass necklace, and this belt, believe it or not, it's huge, is all poured glass. But she's also known for her chains in her purses, you know, obviously the hem of the suits, but her necklaces and her sautoirs, which are these kind of simple necklaces, are much coveted and command pretty high prices in auction. In closing, I want to just say that for all of you future designers, especially women, be fierce. Know what you love and what you can do, and just go for it. I mean, Chanel did it. You look at women from the early 20th century, Schiaparelli and Madeleine Vianney, who is an unbelievable businesswoman. Brush up on your business skills, and that way you don't have to depend on other people, and go for it. So stay tuned for the show off. This week's show off is completely in line with the early Chanels that we did. This coat is from about 1925. It's a piece I've had in my collection for over 30 years. When I bought it, it was not in perfect condition, but I don't care. I have actually rented or loaned this to 3 major high fashion designers for inspiration, and you can see why. The coat itself is made out of a wool felt, the kind you can actually buy. I mean, nowadays it's not wool, but you can buy similar gauge at Joann's Fabrics. Whether or not you can get it in a 54-inch width. But what's so amazing about this is how they use the felt to whip stitch the ends, also on the sleeves, but to also create strips that they crocheted for the detail on the cuff and the collar. And then take a look at this back. Does this look like the Chanel Camellia? I think so. So the design on this piece is perfect. Because it is wool, it does have a few choo-choos and a few condition issues, but beyond that, I don't care, because it's a magnificent piece and something that I thought might inspire you. So that's this week's show off. That's it for now. Bye.